As fans eagerly await filmmaker Quentin Tarantino's 10th, and supposedly final, film, currently as mysterious as the contents of Marcellus Wallace's briefcase, let's go all the way back to the beginning. Reservoir Dogs marked the emergence of two pop culture phenomena: the kinetic filmmaker who would change the shape of indie cinema, and a movie that helped establish a new kind of cool.
It's gotta work.
And find out what the fuck happened to this movie. The story behind Reservoir Dogs all goes back to the video store, namely the now closed Video Archives in Manhattan Beach, California, the shop where Quentin Tarantino famously worked for years. For a motor-mouthed encyclopedia of cinema knowledge who was raised on double features and TV, it was the best possible place to work. It was at Video Archives that Tarantino co-wrote My Best Friend's Birthday. Shot on black and white 16mm with a $5,000 budget, it clocked in at 70 minutes, which technically makes it the first film from Quentin Tarantino. Although My Best Friend's Birthday is now partially lost, around half of it can be found online, it served as good practice for the budding director. So did the makeshift workshops at Video Archives, designed for the co-workers, including future Pulp Fiction co-writer Roger Avary, to pass around and critique each other's scripts. One of Tarantino's early efforts was titled True Romance, which began as a collaboration with Avary called The Open Road. Tarantino actually managed to sell the script, which would later be directed by Tony Scott, whose own Top Gun would be the target of a well-reasoned analysis on homoeroticism by Tarantino in the 1994 film Sleep With Me.
It is a story about a man's struggle with his own homosexuality.
Sold for $50,000, True Romance gave Tarantino some go-ahead money to try and get a more serious movie made. It would also help ensure that he wouldn't just end up playing Elvis impersonators or serving as a PA who cleans up dog shit on Venice Beach for a Dolph Lundgren workout video. Reservoir Dogs would be a heist movie that wouldn't show the heist, partly due to budgetary restrictions and partly as a move in creative energy. Written in just over 3 weeks, Reservoir Dogs revolved around a group of criminals, all strangers, hired for a diamond heist. Things immediately turn sour at the robbery, with the added tension that one of the men is an undercover cop. It would be told in a non-linear structure, which would become as much of a Tarantino staple as witty exchanges and women's feet. Inspirations for Reservoir Dogs came from all across the cinematic spectrum. The French New Wave was a huge influence, with Jean-Pierre Melville's gangster movies playing a part and Jean-Luc Godard being a stylistic idol. Tarantino even named his production company A Band Apart, after the French title for Godard's crime film Band of Outsiders. There was also Stanley Kubrick's early racetrack heist film, The Killing, and the film noir Kansas City Confidential. His initial idea was to make a heist movie where the robbers all got away, out of his annoyance with crime films where minor quirks of fate would result in a bitter ending for the characters. But he clearly changed his mind over the course of putting the script on paper, judging by the ultimate bloodbath on screen. The idea of naming characters after colors was borrowed from 1974's The Taking of Pelham 123, which featured similar criminal codenames like Mr. Blue, Mr. Green, and yes, Mr. Brown. The stylish 1987 Hong Kong thriller City on Fire also seemed to share many elements, even drawing accusations of plagiarism. Reflecting on this type of criticism, Tarantino openly admitted, "I steal from every single movie ever made. If my work has anything, it's that I'm taking this from this and that from that and mixing them together." The Reservoir Dogs script was riddled with crisp, quotable dialogue, complete with a hot take on Madonna's Like a Virgin.
It hurts just like it did the first time. You see, the pain is reminding a fuck machine what it was once like to be a virgin. Hence, like a virgin.
Which the singer would later rebuke, signing one of her albums to Tarantino. To Quentin, it's not about dick, it's about love. Oh, and about the movie's name. The inspirations for later Tarantino titles were generally without mystique. Pulp Fiction comes from pulp mags and crime paperbacks. Inglourious Bastards is a purposely misspelled take on a schlocky Enzo Castellari war movie. Kill Bill is an uncomplicated description of the bride's goal, and so on. But the title for Reservoir Dogs isn't quite as clear. The most popular origin theory is that a Video Archives customer had mangled the name of the French film Au revoir les enfants. But this is more or less considered lore. Tarantino himself said, "It's just a perfect title for those guys. They are Reservoir Dogs, whatever the hell that means." With the script complete, Tarantino got it to producer Lawrence Bender, who slipped it to actor Harvey Keitel through an acting class Bender was taking. Keitel jumped on board, boosting the production budget significantly to $1.5 million and providing real legitimacy to the film. According to Tarantino, Keitel was so impressed with the script's apparent authenticity that he asked if the fledgling filmmaker had grown up in a bad neighborhood, or if he had family members connected with tough guys. Tarantino just shrugged and responded, "I watch movies." Initially, Monte Hellman, director of acid western Ride the Whirlwind and road movie Two Lane Blacktop, wanted to direct. But this was Tarantino's baby. He had even confidently put written and directed by Quentin Tarantino on the script's cover page, and so Hellman would serve as an executive producer. Now Tarantino just had to assemble the team of color-coded crooks. In addition to securing better finances, Keitel also played a huge role in the casting, even fronting his own money so Tarantino and Bender could hold casting sessions in New York, a location that would give them access to a broader variety of actors. Keitel would take the role of career criminal Mr. White himself. Mr. Pink would be Steve Buscemi, then on his way to becoming a Coen brothers favorite. Tarantino actually wrote the part for himself, but he would later settle for Mr. Brown, despite its connotations.
Yeah, but Mr. Brown, that's a little too close to Mr. Shit.
Mr. Orange would be played by Tim Roth, who officially took interest after a drunken night out with the director. Rounding out the lawbreakers were Michael Madsen as malicious Mr. Blonde, and crime novelist and actual ex-convict Edward Bunker as Mr. Blue. There was also the established Chris Penn as Nice Guy Eddie, and Lawrence Tierney as gruff ringleader Joe Cabot, nudging out character actor Timothy Carey, who had appeared in Key Inspiration, The Killing, and Robert Forster, who would later work with Tarantino on 1997's Jackie Brown. Other actors who auditioned or were pursued for roles included Vincent Gallo, James Woods, future Tarantino regular Samuel L. Jackson, musician Tom Waits, who called the script poetic, and George Clooney, who would soon join Tarantino From Dusk Till Dawn. The cast had 2 weeks of rehearsal, which, according to Keitel, nearly went longer as Tarantino entertained the idea of doing it as a stage play. Production on the movie began in July 1991 and went 35 days. The primary location of the movie, an abandoned warehouse, was actually a mortuary, which seems appropriate considering just about every primary character is headed there by the movie's end. The upstairs of the building was repurposed into Mr. Orange's apartment. Those matching black suits, in addition to making everyone just look really cool, were based on the idea that actual robbers all dress alike so that witnesses have a harder time describing them as individuals to police. The production itself ran relatively smoothly, even though Tim Roth sometimes got unintentionally glued to the floor after spending hours under hot lights in a syrupy blood mixture. The British actor did also have challenges wrapping his mouth around an LA dialect. But the biggest thorny situation behind the scenes was actor Lawrence Tierney, known for being an ornery brute both on and off the set. Things got physical when Tierney, who Tarantino later described as a, quote, crazy motherfucker, shoved the director in front of the cast and crew during an escalated confrontation. For that, Tarantino threw him off the set, only later making nice to finish the movie. Monte Hellman said that Tierney terrified everyone on the set and was a constant concern for potential lawsuits. Tierney also had difficulty remembering his lines, another source of frustration for both the actor and the director, who puts premium importance on his dialogue. As for the mystery surrounding the fate of Mr. Blue,
nobody's got a clue what happened to Mr. Blue?
Eddie Bunker claimed that one final scene was planned showing his demise, but the production ran out of money and it was never filmed. With shooting finished and editing essentially completed, his first with longtime editor Sally Menke, who passed in 2010, Tarantino engaged in what would be one of his most pivotal moments of creative control, centered around the movie's most iconic scene. Set to Stealers Wheels Stuck in the Middle with You, this scene features the sadistic Mr. Blonde doing an improvised dance around a bloody and bound police officer. Brandishing a straight razor, Mr. Blonde goes to town on the cop's ear, carving it off as the camera moves away, leaving much of the violence to the viewer's imagination, which tends to be a more corrupt place than the screen. The gruesome scene, an early gag by effects maestro Greg Nicotero, has been compared to the unsettling Singin' in the Rain assault from Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange. It was also the subject of much discussion and debate between the filmmaker and Miramax. Producer Harvey Weinstein was primarily concerned about the audience, stating, "I was afraid it would turn women off." Always a gentleman, that Harvey. Tarantino insisted it remain, and unlike so many before and after, he eventually won the editing battle against Weinstein. It's still one of the most controversial scenes in movie history. Tarantino stated, "For some people, the violence or the rudeness of the language is a mountain they can't climb. That's okay, it's not their cup of tea, but I am affecting them. I wanted that scene to be disturbing." And disturbing it was, to the point that horror director Wes Craven walked out during a film festival screening, utterly shocked by the sequence. The movie's soundtrack, presented as part of
K. Billy's Super Sounds of the 70s
radio show, would be the beginning of Tarantino's perfect incorporation of songs both familiar and obscure in his movies. He wanted more incongruous music, which he described as the super sugary 70s bubblegum sound he grew up with. It certainly worked. The Mr. Blonde torture scene would not be nearly as disturbing without Jerry Rafferty and Joe Egan's harmless, and now infamous, pop song in the background. The real breakthrough for Reservoir Dogs came at Sundance in 1992. Even though it was his first feature, Tarantino had already established a reputation and a genuine buzz within the community, having taken workshops there the previous year when he had the script with him and even had Steve Buscemi perform scenes in front of Monty Hellman and Terry Gilliam, who was given a special thanks in the credits. Along with In the Soup's Alexandre Rockwell and Gas Food Lodging's Allison Anders, Tarantino was part of what came to be known as the Sundance Class of '92. It was Reservoir Dogs that had Park City foaming at the mouth, despite a premiere in which the film wasn't projected properly and suffered a power outage during the screening. Reservoir Dogs rocked the festival and marked a true change in the sorts of films that would get accepted. Author and historian Peter Biskin noted that characters rarely died in Sundance films, lest of AIDS, old age, or boredom. Even Robert Redford, who nurtured the festival, didn't want a slew of violent movies. Reservoir Dogs, as Tarantino put it, was no, quote, merchant ivory shit, referring to stuffy period pieces like A Room with a View and Howard's End. The director in his debut, bridging genre movies and art house films, kicked down the door and held a blade to its ear. Reservoir Dogs would later play at the Toronto International Film Festival, where it won the International Critics Award, and the Cannes Film Festival, where Tarantino would soon win the Palme d'Or with his follow-up Pulp Fiction. Distributed by Miramax, Reservoir Dogs opened in New York in October 1992, but made less than $3 million domestically. It was definitely not universally praised by critics at the time, with assessments like, "This movie isn't really about anything," and "The only thing Tarantino spells out is the violence." But it would go on to become a VHS phenomenon, which seems fitting since its origins are at video archives. Reservoir Dogs marked not just the emergence of one of cinema's most unique and visionary filmmakers, but also propelled a resurgence in the independent film movement. Empire magazine would call it the greatest independent film ever made, edging out classics like George Romero's Night of the Living Dead and Martin Scorsese's Mean Streets. It may have started as a small labor of love by a hyperactive video store kid, but its immediate influence rapidly spawned countless copycats filling those same store shelves, each desperate to mimic his black comedy, fractured chronology, articulate sociopaths, and jolts of violence. As Tarantino phrased it, I became an adjective sooner than I thought I was going to. The movie has been widely revisited in many formats since its release, from action figures to video games to Suicide Girls burlesque. A young Michael Fassbender produced a stage version even though the film itself was banned in Ireland at the time. 20 years after the film's release, director Jason Reitman staged a live reading with an all-black cast that included Lawrence Fishburne, Anthony Mackie, Anthony Anderson, Terrence Howard, and Cuba Gooding Jr. Among his dozens of unrealized projects, Tarantino has frequently considered resurrecting some of his characters and movies, from a Vega Brothers spin-off that has aged out of possibility, to Kill Bill 3, which would find the bride and her daughter trapped by some of the movie's survivors. Reservoir Dogs is certainly no exception, with Tarantino having flirted with turning it into a book, so far writing 2 chapters before shelving it to focus on the novelization of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Tarantino recently stated,
I actually considered about doing a remake of Reservoir Dogs as my last movie. I won't do it, internet, all right? But I considered it.
Oh well, he can tease his audience all he wants. We'll show up for whatever comes next, or last, as the case may be.
Before we continue with our video, here's a reminder to click the Store tab on any of our JoBlo channels and browse our collection of the latest and freshest designs in our merch store. Go get you some.
As a rising filmmaker with a smash debut, there's always that fear of the sophomore slump, even those with some of the finest debuts on record. Dennis Hopper, George Romero, Richard Kelly have all suffered it. The pressure was on for Quentin Tarantino after Reservoir Dogs, a Sundance sensation that launched the cinema of cool and helped usher in a new era of indie movies. So what did QT accomplish with his sophomore effort? Nothing too over the top, just writing and directing one of the most groundbreaking independent films in movie history, changing the industry perception on low-budget movies, and solidifying himself as one of the most unique voices in the field. So light up a red apple, unwrap a big kahuna burger, and bring out the gimp as we find out what the f*** happened to this movie. Considering Tarantino's encyclopedic knowledge of pop culture, it's absolutely no surprise that Pulp Fiction, like most of the rest of his filmography, is rooted in a work that predated it. For what could become his second feature, QT took inspiration from Mario Bava's anthology horror Black Sabbath, in addition to Western detective adventure publication Black Mask, the style of which, a pulp magazine, lent the film's title. He would split the writing, which began in the early 90s, with fellow Video Archives buddy Roger Avary. Tarantino's portion would become Reservoir Dogs, while Avary's, titled Pandemonium Reigns, ended up as the backbone of Butch's sequence later on in Pulp. The entire project would soon get shelved so QT could turn his crime heist section into his debut and casually change the face of the independent film movement. No big deal.
Thanks for watching JoBlo videos. If you enjoy our shows, please like and subscribe, and click the bell to be notified when new videos go live. Now, back to the show.
Revisiting the project after the success of Reservoir Dogs, QT decided to ditch the anthology idea altogether, but still have individual, yet intersecting storylines. The script would offer a collection of twists on classics, the old chestnuts as QT put it. You know the ones. The low-level criminal who has to look after his boss's wife, the boxer who's forced to throw a fight, and the real classic, the bondage-clad sex slave kept in a pawnshop basement. And so Tarantino headed off to Amsterdam, where we're sure nothing was there to distract him whatsoever. Entirely written by hand for around 3 months, it was later given to a typist who called Tarantino a mad genius but also a functional illiterate. Pulp Fiction was finished in January 1993, with the final draft complete in May of that year. Producer Lawrence Bender, who worked with Tarantino on Dogs, made ties with Jersey Films and subsequently Miramax. Some other studios had circled the project, namely TriStar, who offered Tarantino $900,000 during his post-Dogs celebrity, but later bailed because Pulp Fiction was deemed, quote, too demented, obviously missing the themes of redemption throughout the story.
What happened here was a miracle, and I want you to acknowledge it.
Keep in mind that TriStar also produced Weekend at Bernie's 2, quite demented in its own right. Once Harvey Weinstein and Miramax, who had just been acquired by Disney, came on board, Pulp Fiction nabbed an $8.5 million budget, with a sizable $150,000 of that going to the Jackrabbit Slim set alone. Tarantino also negotiated for final cut and cast approval. Showing their solidarity to the director and his project, much of the cast would be taking pay cuts and or getting box office points in lieu of their usual big paydays. Hitman and McDonald's aficionado Vincent Vega would be played by John Travolta, then far removed from his once acclaimed career of Saturday Night Fever, Urban Cowboy, and Blowout. The role was intended for Michael Madsen, who turned it down to be in Wyatt Earp, while Miramax supposedly wanted Daniel Day-Lewis, perhaps fearing the method actor would actually start shooting heroin and Marvin in the face. Tarantino fought for John Travolta instead, meeting with him to play board games of his classic shows and movies. According to Tarantino's own casting wish list, Michael Keaton was a, quote, strong possibility. They would later collaborate on Jackie Brown. The role of Vince's partner, the mushroom cloud laying motherfucker Jules Winfield, went to Samuel L. Jackson, but not without some snags. It was written for Lawrence Fishburne, who turned it down due to how much heroin use was depicted in the script. Jackson, believing the role was actually written for him, assumed he had the role. Still, he was nearly beat out by a relative unknown, later cast as Paul, but that's between y'all, so he had to fight for it. Eddie Murphy was also on the short list. Originally cast to be on top of Jackson's head was an afro, but a misunderstanding in the wardrobe department led to a now iconic Jerry curl. Numerous names circled Mia Wallace, wife of crime boss Marcellus Wallace, including Isabella Rossellini, Michelle Pfeiffer, and future Fox Force 5 member Daryl Hannah. Maybe their feet weren't pretty enough? Miramax supposedly pushed for Holly Hunter, fresh off the piano, and Meg Ryan, then the reigning queen of rom-coms. It would go to Uma Thurman in her debut as Tarantino's muse. Playing double-crossing motorcycle, chopper, stealing boxer Butch Coolidge would be Bruce Willis, who got the role after Matt Dillon took too long to say yes. The casting of Willis, who actually wanted to play Vincent Vega, made the project legit, according to Tarantino. The rest of the cast would be a menagerie of icons, familiar faces, and Reservoir Dogs alum. There's Ving Rhames as Marcellus Wallace, who absolutely does not look like a bitch, and neither does Sid Haig, who turned down the role. Christopher Walken in what essentially amounts to a cameo. Reservoir Dogs' own Mr. White, Harvey Keitel, as Winston Wolfe, he solves problems, in what is surprisingly his last on-screen Tarantino appearance to date. He voice cameoed in Inglourious Basterds. Reservoir Dogs' Mr. Orange, Tim Roth, as low-level Robert Pumpkin, teaming with Amanda Plummer's Honey Bunny. And there's also one more Reservoir Dogs appearance. Steve Buscemi as a waiter dressed as Buddy Holly. Eric Stoltz is drug dealer Lance, John Cusack was the first choice, and wife Jody is Rosanna Arquette. Pam Grier was considered, but Tarantino didn't find it believable that any man could get away with yelling at her. We found this to be fact when she played Jackie Brown next. Filming began in September 1993 and lasted 51 days, with Tarantino bringing along a number of Reservoir Dogs crew members for the ride. The final day consisted of Christopher Walken's immediately quotable watch monologue.
His 5 long years he wore this watch. Up his.
When production wrapped in November and editing commenced soon after, Tarantino and company headed to the 1994 Cannes Film Festival. Dogs had screened at a competition there 2 years prior, but this time Pulp Fiction was competing for the Palme d'Or, the festival's, and arguably cinema's, highest honor. After much anticipation, jury president Clint Eastwood read the winner, which had up to that point not won a single award: Pulp Fiction. The applause was near unanimous, except for one French spectator, who heckled the director, who in turn flipped her off. Pulp Fiction opened stateside on October 14, 1994. It would debut at #1 at the box office, nudging The Specialist out of the top spot, and easily besting fellow newcomers Wes Craven's New Nightmare, Little Giants, and Exit to Eden, just to name a few movies you haven't thought of in a long time. It would go on to gross $108 million domestically and $213 million worldwide, making it not just the third biggest R-rated movie of 1994 after True Lies and Speed, but the highest grossing indie movie ever up to that point.
Okay.
Nearly every aspect of the film was garnering attention, from the content and structure to the box office and soundtrack. A Billboard Top 20 album, despite Neil Diamond's refusal to partake. Hence, Urge Overkill's cover of Girl, You'll Be a Woman Soon. Despite a record-breaking box office and nearly universal critical acclaim, more on those later, Pulp was hit with immediate controversies. One concerned the language. Not the 265 F-bombs, but the multiple N-words uttered 18 times, a few by Tarantino's own character, Jimmy. This would be a recurring gripe of Tarantino's films, with Jackie Brown and The Hateful Eight clocking in nearly 80 usages total, while Django Unchained had well over 100. There too were issues with the drug use depicted on the screen. Then US President hopeful Bob Dole called it the, quote, romance of heroin, while then Disney chairman Jeffrey Katzenberg urged Weinstein to get QT to go, quote, easy on the heroin scene, meaning Mia's accidental overdose, complete with mushroom soup spittle. But the real takeaway behind the scenes stories revolving around this scene have less to do with heroin than movie magic and perfectly timed medical emergencies. The jabbing of adrenaline into Mia's chest was actually shot backwards, a factoid known to nearly every fan at this point. And during a screening at the New York Film Festival, one man passed out during the scene. Even if he was a diabetic, it sure makes for great press. Controversy over Pulp Fiction remains even to this day. And yes, it involves NFTs, because of course it does. In a bit of alphabet soup, QT wanted to sell NFTs of uncut scenes and handwritten scripts, but Miramax is, as of publication of this video, suing, claiming Tarantino gave up most of his rights in the 90s. There was some behind-the-scenes controversy as well. When Pulp Fiction was finally unleashed in the cinemas, the sole writing credit went to Quentin Tarantino. Where was Roger Avary, who undoubtedly served an integral part in the script's conception? Tarantino more or less muscled Avary so the credits could read written and directed by Quentin Tarantino. Avary only took a story by credit and $25,000, clearly aware that Tarantino would be the film's promotional mascot. Tarantino's blanket defense of this situation? Quote, he didn't write the script. Pulp did extremely well around award season, nabbing numerous major accolades. 7 Oscar nominations, 6 Golden Globe nods, 9 at the BAFTAs, 5 at the Independent Spirit Awards, and many more. Its sole win at both the Oscars and the Globes was for the screenplay, again a topic of indiscrepancy. Although both Tarantino and Avary won the Oscar, only Tarantino was nominated at the Globes. In what could be construed as a direct slight, Tarantino didn't even thank his partner Avery during his speech. But it's clear that the duo have settled most of their issues, with Avery saying QT is, quote, like a brother.
Cool.
The two even have a planned podcast, the Video Archives podcast. And while Forrest Gump would take home most of the major top prizes that year, Pulp Fiction would prove to have far better legs than Gump. No pun intended. The film changed the Hollywood game entirely, with Entertainment Weekly noting it marked, quote, nothing less than the reinvention of mainstream American cinema. It gave indies more street cred, marking a rebrand for industry commercialization. While smaller movies had been nominated for Best Picture before, a look at some indies in the immediate years after shows the impact. 1995's Il Postino had just a $3 million budget. 1996's Shine had a $6 million budget, while 97's The Full Monty just $3.5 million. It also continued Miramax's then unprecedented run of Best Picture nominations. Thanks to Pulp, it was cool for an indie flick to make it to the red carpet. And really, one can make a direct link from Pulp Fiction to at least the mid-2000s, when fellow Independent Spirit Award winners like Lost in Translation, Sideways, and Brokeback Mountain were raking in Oscar nominations. Today, it's not uncommon to have multiple on the ballot. Pulp Fiction spawned countless ripoffs, homages, and spoofs. IMDb's referenced in and spoofed in pages cite nearly 1,300 movies, TV shows, video games, and yes, porn parodies, a true gauge of success. Notable nods range from Things to Do in Denver When You're Dead and the early Guy Ritchie filmography to Space Jam and Ants. But there was a deluge, and far too many filmmakers were trying to be QT on adrenaline, with faux hip characters spitting out pop culture references because they thought that's now how they all had to talk. Tarantino's personal favorite of the ripoffs was CM Talkington's Love in a 45. Of course, Tarantino steals from, pays homage to, plenty of his own. There's not just the Black Sabbath inspiration, but the glowing briefcase from Kiss Me Deadly, the dance sequence from Band of Outsiders, the Mexican standoff from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and a barrage of others that we mere casual moviegoers could never pick up on. Keen eyes have even connected various tools in the pawn shop to movies like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Notably, Pulp Fiction marked a much-deserved second wind of John Travolta's career, which reportedly Harvey Weinstein went around taking credit for despite not wanting to cast him in the first place. At the time, Travolta was locked in a cycle of talking baby movies. Come to think of it, so was Bruce Willis. Whoa! After, he exploded yet again, starring in the terrific Get Shorty, for which he won his only Golden Globe to date, accessible box office smashes like Michael and Phenomenon, and actioners like Broken Arrow and Face Off, not to mention a completely Oscar-worthy turn in Primary Colors. There would, unfortunately, be no Vega Brothers prequel. Samuel L. Jackson too got a major boost, having previously been in scene-stealing roles for the likes of Spike Lee, while Uma Thurman was suddenly bankable, but didn't fully try to take advantage of this until Batman and Robin. In the years that followed, the Writers Guild of America ranked the screenplay as the 16th greatest ever, while They Shoot Pictures, Don't They? Has consistently placed the film in the top 75 of their 1,000 greatest films list. In 2013, the National Film Registry selected it for preservation. And sorry to break your concentration, but we should take this opportunity to look into what exactly is in that MacGuffin briefcase. While the actual contents was a light bulb and 2 batteries, the narrative contents are ripe for fan theories. That it's Marcellus Wallace's soul, hence the 666 combination and the band-aid on the back of his neck, or the jewels from Reservoir Dogs, or even the Best Picture Oscar that Pulp Fiction should have won. But we here at JoBlo did a little investigating and found out the real answer for you. The contents of the briefcase is...
The sophomore slump is one of the most fabled threats in the movie industry, but Quentin Tarantino busted it when he followed up Reservoir Dogs with the Palme d'Or winning, Oscar-snatching, industry-changing, instant classic Pulp Fiction.
This is a tasty burger.
How then would he follow that up? By going against the grain and adapting a novel, thereby putting his third feature under scrutiny almost immediately.
The way I see it, you and me got one thing to talk about. One thing.
So did Jackie Brown recover from its initial expectations? Did putting 70 stars Pam Grier and Robert Forster in main roles pay off? Do you now have that Delphonics song stuck in your head?
I know you like the Delphonics. They're pretty good.
Let's set our levels like we like them and put a cherry on top as we find out what the happened to this movie. Jackie Brown has its origins in something completely different than any other Tarantino script, a book, Elmore Leonard's 1992 crime novel, Rum Punch. And yes, it does seem an odd choice for him to adapt, since he had already written two of the most clever original screenplays of the Sundance age.
Can you believe that?
Well, I mean, at the time I was told it sounded reasonable.
Tarantino actually read Rum Punch before it was even published during the making of Pulp Fiction. As an option for how to follow up Pulp, Tarantino snatched up the rights to 3 Leonard novels, Freaky Deaky, Kill Shot, and Rum Punch. You'll notice none of these are titled Jackie Brown. That's because the protagonist of Rum Punch was actually named Jackie Burke.
Oh, come on, girl. You know I was just playing with you.
I ain't playing with you.
Tarantino was going to pawn off the script on another unnamed director until he decided to reread it, ultimately choosing it as his third outing. In the process of adapting it, Tarantino was unable to come up with a suitable white actress, Jackie Burke being a white character, to write for. A black actress, he thought, could give the character more depth, and so he changed Jackie's race, in turn renaming her Jackie Brown.
What's this?
What's this shit?
Partly as an homage to Foxy Brown, the blaxploitation classic starring none other than Pam Grier, who Tarantino is now writing for. Despite this, Tarantino says Jackie Brown is absolutely not a blaxploitation movie. On changing Jackie from white to black, producer Lawrence Bender said she's very vulnerable, and by making her black instead of white puts her that much more into jeopardy. Tarantino made other changes too, like moving the location from South Florida to the South Bay neighborhood of LA. Not only does QT love LA, he doesn't like Miami weather. Tarantino called adapting his first novel an interesting challenge and deceptively difficult. It also put an automatic once-removed quality he hadn't experienced before. Fortunately, Elmore Leonard loved the script, reportedly saying it was one of the best he's ever read. And so now casting could begin.
But I'm waiting on her. I'm ready to go. Yeah.
You're the one George.
Well, that might she keep saying in a minute, right?
Go in there and grab that bitch by the head, drag her ass out of there. This is my goddamn money we get.
Tarantino easily landed Pam Grier, then bouncing around in mostly thankless roles in movies like Escape from LA and Mars Attacks.
Get your butt on that front. Get on that bus, boy. Y'all was tripping all over you. You get back there and I don't want to hear another word out of you. You hear me? I heard that.
She actually thought the director wanted her to play Melanie, but QT and PG's relationship goes back even further. He originally wanted her to play Jody in Pulp Fiction, but she was dismissed after it was determined that Eric Stoltz wouldn't make it out of the room with his dick intact if he ever talked to Pam Grier that way.
I don't know you. Who is this? Don't come here. I'm hanging up the phone. Prank caller. Prank caller.
The role eventually went to Rosanna Arquette. Upon meeting Tarantino at his office, Grier was suspicious of how many Pam Grier movie posters he had hanging up. She figured this was a put-on, an intentional setup, but QT admitted, I was going to take them down because you were coming over. For bail bondsman Max Cherry, major names like Paul Newman and Gene Hackman were attached. Even the great but less commercial John Saxon circled the role. However, Tarantino found inspiration in an even more unlikely source, the 1980 Jaws ripoff Alligator, starring the great Robert Forster, in a performance that Tarantino actually ranked higher than Robert De Niro's in Raging Bull that year.
Yeah, you believe me now. No dream.
When did I ever doubt you?
On the role, Forster said, "Oh, my career was dead. I didn't have an agent, a manager, a lawyer, nothing. I was hoping some kid who liked me growing up would turn into a movie maker and give me a good job." Like Grier, Forster also auditioned for a prior Tarantino flick, trying out for Joe in Reservoir Dogs before Lawrence Tierney got it.
How about if I'm Mr. Purple? I mean, that sounds good to me. I'll be Mr. Purple.
You're not Mr. Purple. Some guy on some other job is Mr. Purple. You're Mr. Pink.
There is another Pam Grier link too. Forster also worked on Larry Cohen's original Gangstas the year prior, although they did not share the screen. For the role of recently freed from prison Lewis, Tarantino went with Robert De Niro, who he knew through Harvey Keitel. Wonder if he saw Tarantino's top 10 performances of 1980 list.
I didn't look like a bum.
Oh, come on now, man. You know you had that Salvation Army thing going.
De Niro came about the project when Harvey Weinstein gave him the script before Tarantino could muster up the courage. Sylvester Stallone later claimed he turned down the role. He would also snub Death Proof years later, so we can only assume he's afraid to show his feet on camera.
Wiggle your big toe.
On the other end of Lewis's gun was beach bimbo chatterbox Melanie, to be played by Bridget Fonda.
Coffee's good, it gets you higher.
You definitely know a lot about that.
Not surprisingly, one of the standouts in Jackie Brown is Samuel L. Jackson as gunrunner Ordell Robbie.
You told him it's me?
They already know it's you.
Goddamn, that don't mean you got to confirm it.
Jackson had a specialized look, described as a samurai, mad priest, mad kung fu priest on the mountain look. For research, Jackson read both Rum Punch and The Switch, which also featured Robbie. Wonder if it was the same copy Tarantino shoplifted as a teen. The most trivia-worthy casting is that of Michael Keaton as ATF agent Ray Nicolette, a character he would reprise for a cameo in Steven Soderbergh's Out of Sight, another Elmore Leonard adaptation, the next year.
Ray's working with the FBI task force on the prison break.
Tell me, Ray, do you ever wear one that says undercover? No?
Tarantino insisted Miramax not charge Universal to use the character, seeing how important the character would be to Soderbergh's story.
Miramax was going to have to lease the rights to, and I, could charge them money, and I said, no. They get Nicolette for free.
Early on, Keaton even tried to talk Tarantino out of casting him, but they reached an agreement over a night of drinking nothing but Jägermeister. Dear viewers, if you need a vomit break, go for it. Greenlit at a $12 million budget, Jackie Brown had a relatively smooth production. As mentioned earlier, Tarantino moved the story's location from Miami to LA, where his other films were set. However, unlike his other films, the visuals of the locations took precedence, with production designer Dave Wasco stating, "The South Bay offers the Los Angeles of 10 to 15 years ago." And while Jackie Brown isn't a period piece per se, key characters drive cars that serve as time capsules. For example, Ordell drives a 1975 Mercedes-Benz SL.
Don't touch my levels now. I got them set just like I like them.
And Jackie drives a 1980 Honda Civic, which the most observant will notice is the same one Bruce Willis drives in Pulp Fiction. It's no pussy wagon, but it can get to the airport.
Where did you get this motorcycle?
It's not a motorcycle, baby. It's a chopper. Come on, let's go.
What happened to my Honda?
I'm sorry, baby. I had to crash that Honda.
Another time capsule element of Jackie Brown is the soundtrack, stacked with soulful and funky 70s tracks like Bobby Womack's Across 110th Street, the title song from the 1972 blaxploitation action film, used in the film's The Graduate-inspired opening scene. There too is the Brother Johnson's Strawberry Letter 23, Bloodstone's Natural High, and, of course, the Delphonics' Didn't I Blow Your Mind This Time, which plays as if it's the film's official theme. To build the world in which Jackie Brown takes place, there was an agreed upon goal to create and maintain a more realistic environment, with the team using as few stand-ins as possible. Wasco had to veer away from the Jackrabbit Slims aesthetic. That is, there couldn't be anything on screen that was, quote, eye-popping and rock and rolling. Cinematographer Guillermo Navarro also, quote, didn't shoot with slow-speed film, which produces lush color, but with faster film that makes for a flatter effect on screen. But it wasn't all business. The production of Jackie Brown let loose one day, Skirt Day, in which all the male crew members had to show a little leg. Of note, Tarantino wore a kilt.
There's no more than what God gave me, you Puritan pukes.
Jackie Brown opened on Christmas Day 1997, debuting at number 5 with just $9.2 million. Behind that year's behemoth Titanic, Bond flick Tomorrow Never Dies in its second week, the debuting As Good As It Gets, and the fourth week of Mouse Hunt. Eventually, it would make $39.6 million, easily earning back its small budget. But it failed to make the splash that Dogs did at Sundance or Pulp did at Cannes. At 154 minutes, Jackie Brown was criticized for being too long and having a slow pace. Its straighter chronology and linear structure, although Tarantino couldn't help but play with the timeline a little bit, also threw some for a loop, interestingly enough.
Maybe, but at that moment, I don't know.
But the loudest criticism came from Spike Lee, who blasted Tarantino for the film's use of the N-word, uttered 38 times, saying, what does he want to be made, an honorary black man? Well, he did seem to be trying to be an honorary Aussie in Django Unchained.
I said a white boy.
Shut up, black. You ain't got nothing to say I want to hear.
Lee said, quote, I have a definite problem with Quentin Tarantino's excessive use of the N-word, and let the record show that I never said that he cannot use that word. I've used that word in many of my films, but I think something is wrong with him. He says he grew up on blaxploitation films, and that they were his favorite films, but he has to realize that those films do not speak to the breadth of the entire African American experience. I mean, the guy's just stupid.
Spike Lee said in that same
argumentative, whatever that was that he said that he used the word home. He should fix that. Not worry about what somebody's doing in their film.
If Jackie Brown's 38 uses of the N-word make Tarantino stupid, what does Django's 110 times make him? Reviews were strong overall though, with perhaps the highest praise coming from Elmore Leonard himself, who said, "That was not an adaptation, that was my novel." Following Pulp Fiction's 7 Oscar nominations and Best Original Screenplay win, expectations were high for Miramax to turn up huge at the Oscars. Instead, weight was thrown behind Good Will Hunting, and the only nomination it got was Best Supporting Actor for Robert Forster, but he lost to, Robin Williams for Good Will Hunting.
It's not your fault. It's not your fault. Don't
Pam Grier would get nods from the Screen Actors Guild and the Golden Globes. Jackson also picked up a nod from the HFPA, but Tarantino's hopes of seeing Grier be the first black woman to win the Best Actress Oscar would be quashed, as Grier failed to secure a nod.
Now that shit work my nerves, you and that motherfucker being so buddy-buddy.
Hey, if I wasn't so buddy-buddy with that this wouldn't work.
With both Grier and Forster, Tarantino was further establishing a reputation for resurrecting actors' careers, as he did with John Travolta on Pulp Fiction, and would later give a go with the likes of David Carradine, Daryl Hannah, Bruce Dern, and more. Unfortunately, neither Grier nor Forster exactly exploded in a Travolta fashion, although Grier did later gain praise for her turn on Showtime's The L Word. Despite not being as revered as Pulp Fiction and others, Jackie Brown still feels special in the filmography of Quentin Tarantino. It's not quite unique necessarily, but it's more mature, and that counts for something.
It's not really something I think about.
It initially felt like lesser Tarantino, but as years pass, Jackie Brown has gained a respectable following, with many ranking it as their favorite of the directors. Tarantino himself has said that it gets better the more times you see it, and he has a point. As even Pam Grier said, it encompasses so much. It's like watching a 3D puzzle in your brain. It now makes sporadic appearances on best of lists, even ranking 215th on Empire's 2008 list of the greatest films ever made. Still, it remains, more than 25 years after its release, an underappreciated gem.
And when you absolutely, positively got to kill every motherfucker in the room, except no substitutes.